A sickening silence fell over Il Giardino Privato as the tiny French bulldog puppy went limp on the white linen tablecloth. Enzo Bellini's tattooed hand froze mid-stroke on Piccolo's fur, his blood running cold. The doctor in the tuxedo pressed 2 fingers against the puppy's chest, waited, then slowly shook his head. "Don Bellini, I'm sorry. He's gone." What happened? At that exact moment, Isabella Romano, who hadn't spoken to another human being in 8 months and never entered buildings with more than 1 exit, suddenly abandoned every survival instinct she'd developed on the streets. She burst through the service doors, ignoring the 3 guns that immediately trained on her chest. She just locked eyes on the puppy, her breath catching. She wasn't just seeing a dying animal. She was recognizing the exact respiratory blockage pattern she'd studied in her final semester at veterinary school, right before the cartel murdered her professor and she went into hiding. "Just before we start, tell me your current time and where you are listening from." Isabella Romano had learned to make herself small, not just physically, though at 5'4" and barely 100 pounds, hunger had done most of that work, but existentially. She had mastered the art of occupying space without claiming it, of existing without being seen. The alley behind Il Giardino Privato had become her kingdom of shadows, a narrow strip of brick and dumpster where the city's forgotten could survive on the scraps of the city's elite. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her dark hoodie pulled low over her face, and watched the kitchen staff through the grease-stained window. It was Thursday, which meant the risotto special. By 9:30, they'd scrape at least 3 plates into the waste bin. If she timed it right, if she stayed invisible long enough, she could eat tonight. The February wind cut through the alley like a knife through silk. Isabella pulled her sleeves over her hands, the same hands that had once held scalpels with the precision of a concert pianist, that had sutured arteries and diagnosed conditions that stumped her professors. Now those hands were tools of survival, skilled only in the delicate art of dumpster diving without making noise. A burst of laughter echoed from inside the restaurant. Through the frosted glass of the dining room window, she could see them, the beautiful people in their beautiful clothes, gesturing with wine glasses that probably cost more than she used to spend on textbooks. She didn't hate them. Hate required energy she couldn't afford. But she watched them with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying an alien species. Then she saw him. The man at the head table was impossible to miss, even from her vantage point in the alley. He sat like a king holding court, his tailored navy suit struggling to contain shoulders that looked carved from marble. Tattoos crept up from his collar, dark vines on olive skin. Even at this distance, even through the distorted glass, Isabella could feel the weight of his presence, the way everyone else in the room oriented themselves around him, like planets around a sun. And on the table in front of him, incongruous among the crystal and china, lay a puppy. Isabella's breath caught. It was a French bulldog, tiny and tan, sprawled on the white tablecloth. At first, she thought it was sleeping, but something about the way it lay triggered an alarm in the part of her brain she'd tried to shut down 8 months ago, the part that still remembered textbook diagrams and emergency protocols, the part that had cost her everything. She pressed closer to the window, her survival instincts screaming at her to move away, to stay hidden, to never draw attention. But her eyes were locked on that puppy, and her medical training was a rip current pulling her under. The puppy's chest wasn't moving right. The rise and fall was too shallow, too rapid. Its tongue, she could just make out the edge of it, was starting to show a bluish tint even in the warm restaurant lighting, and the way its legs were positioned, slightly extended, slightly rigid. "No," she whispered to no one. "No, that's not." A man in a tuxedo, a doctor. She could tell by the way he moved, the confidence of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. Bent over the puppy. He was doing what any competent physician would do. Checking for breathing, for a pulse, following the protocol, preparing to deliver bad news to the terrifying man in the navy suit. But he was wrong. Isabella's fingers curled against the cold brick. He was looking for the wrong thing. This wasn't cardiac arrest. This wasn't sudden death. The puppy's distress pattern, the specific way the muscles were contracting, the color of the mucous membranes. She'd seen this before, in a case study during her clinical rotation. A tracheal obstruction, probably from something lodged in the airway during feeding. Treatable, fixable, if someone acted fast enough, if someone knew what to look for. The doctor straightened, shaking his head. Through the glass, Isabella saw the big man's face transform, saw grief crash into fury, saw his hand slam down on the table hard enough to make the wine glasses jump, saw every person in that opulent room take an involuntary step back. And Isabella Romano, who had spent 8 months perfecting invisibility, who had sworn never to use her skills again, who knew that the moment she revealed what she could do, the cartel would find her and finish what they'd started, made a decision that would destroy her careful anonymity forever. She ran toward the service entrance, her hood falling back, her hands already moving through the muscle memory of an emergency procedure she'd performed exactly once in a cadaver lab, 3 years and a lifetime ago. The service door crashed open with a sound like a gunshot. Isabella burst into the dining room, her worn sneakers skidding on marble that probably cost more per square foot than she used to pay in monthly rent. The warmth hit her first. After hours in the February cold, the restaurant's heated air felt like walking into a wall, but she barely registered it. Her entire focus had narrowed to a single point, the motionless puppy on the white tablecloth. "Stop!" The word tore from her throat, hoarse from disuse. How long had it been since she'd spoken above a whisper? "Don't move him!" 3 men in dark suits moved with synchronized precision, hands disappearing inside their jackets. Isabella registered the movement peripherally, understood what it meant. Guns, definitely guns, but her feet kept moving forward. Survival instinct was screaming at her to run, but something older and deeper had taken control. The same thing that had made her choose veterinary medicine in the first place. The same irrational conviction that every life was worth fighting for. "He's not dead!" She reached the table, her hands already raised, palms out. "He's choking. His airway is blocked. If you don't let me help him right now, he will die. But he's not dead yet." The man in the navy suit, Enzo Bellini, though she didn't know his name yet, had gone absolutely still. His eyes, dark and bottomless as mine shafts, fixed on her face with an intensity that should have stopped her heart. This was a man who could order deaths with a nod. A man whose rage was currently radiating off him in waves that made the air feel thick and dangerous. "Who the fuck?" one of the guards started. "Wait!" Enzo's voice cut through the room like a blade. One word, barely above a speaking volume, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Every person in the restaurant froze. He was still looking at Isabella, his expression unreadable. "You can save him?" "I can try." Isabella's hands were shaking, but her voice steadied. This she knew. This was the one thing in her shattered life she was still certain of. "But I need you to trust me for 60 seconds. Can you do that?" Something flickered behind Enzo's eyes. Calculation, maybe. Or the desperate hope of a man watching the only thing he loved slip away. He nodded once, sharp and decisive, then swept his arm across the table. Wine glasses, silverware, a crystal decanter. Everything crashed to the floor in an explosion of sound and liquid. The tablecloth remained, and on it, the dying puppy. Isabella didn't hesitate. She moved to the table, her trained eye taking in details the others had missed. The puppy's gums were cyanotic, definitely oxygen deprivation. The chest was moving, but the breaths were getting shallower. Minutes, maybe seconds left. Her hands found the puppy's small body, feeling for the anatomical landmarks she'd memorized years ago. French bulldogs have compressed airways, she said, partly to herself, partly to the room full of dangerous men watching her every move. Brachycephalic syndrome. It makes them prone to obstruction. Something got lodged. Food, probably. And with their anatomy, standard intervention won't work. She positioned her fingers on either side of the puppy's throat, feeling for the specific pressure points. This was the maneuver she'd studied in her advanced emergency procedures class, the one her professor had called the nuclear option, because it was high risk and high reward. One wrong move and she could crush the trachea. But without intervention, the puppy had minutes at best. "What are you doing?" The doctor in the tuxedo stepped forward, his professional pride clearly wounded. "You can't just..." "I'm doing a modified Heimlich combined with a mandibular thrust and direct tracheal massage." Isabella's fingers moved with precision that surprised even her. Muscle memory, it turned out, didn't fade even after months of disuse. "The obstruction is too far down for standard abdominal thrusts, and the breed's anatomy requires..." There. She felt it. The tiny shift, the give. Her fingers applied pressure in a specific sequence. Up, forward. Compress. That she'd practiced on models but never on a living animal. The puppy's body convulsed once, hard. Isabella tilted its head, opened the mouth, and swept her finger through the airway. A small piece of filet mignon, barely chewed, came away on her fingertip. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The room held its collective breath. Isabella's hands moved to the puppy's chest, ready to start compressions, ready to breathe life back into... The puppy gasped, a harsh rattling sound that was the most beautiful thing Isabella had ever heard. Its chest expanded, contracted, expanded again. The blue tinge started to fade from its gums. Its eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, and it made a small, bewildered whimper. The room exploded with sound, shocked exclamations, someone's prayer in Italian, the doctor's stammered disbelief. But Isabella only heard silence because she was looking at Enzo Bellini, and Enzo Bellini was looking at her, not with anger, not with suspicion, with something that looked almost like reverence, like she'd just performed not a medical procedure but a miracle. His hand moved slowly, almost reverently, to stroke the puppy's head. The small animal immediately tried to lick his fingers, its tail attempting a weak wag. "How did you—" Enzo's voice was rough, almost broken. "Who are you?" And Isabella realized, with a cold rush of terror, what she'd just done. She'd revealed herself. She'd used skills that only a handful of people possessed. She'd made herself visible, memorable, remarkable. In a room full of people with smartphones and connections and the resources to ask questions, the cartel would know within days, maybe hours. "I'm nobody," she whispered, and then she ran. She shoved past the stunned guards, past the gaping diners, back through the service entrance. Behind her, she heard Enzo's voice, sharp with command. "Stop her! Don't hurt her! Just stop her!" But Isabella had spent 8 months learning every escape route in this neighborhood. She hit the alley at full speed, her hood pulled up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd saved a life tonight, and in doing so, she might have just signed her own death warrant. Isabella didn't stop running until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out beneath her. She ended up in the old industrial district, 3 miles from Il Giardino Privato, collapsed behind a rusted dumpster that reeked of motor oil and rot. Her breath came in ragged gasps that misted in the frigid air. She pulled her knees to her chest and tried to stop shaking. What had she done? What had she been thinking? She hadn't been thinking. That was the problem. She'd seen a dying animal, and 8 months of carefully constructed invisibility had evaporated like steam. All those hours of training, all that instinct her professors had praised, it had overridden every survival mechanism she'd built since the day she watched cartel soldiers put 3 bullets in Dr. Ramirez's chest because he'd made the mistake of treating a federal informant. Her hands were still trembling. She could feel the phantom sensation of the puppy's throat under her fingers, the precise moment when the obstruction had given way. She'd saved him. She knew she had, and now she was going to die for it. The Bellini family. Even Isabella, who'd spent the better part of a year living under society's radar, knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. You didn't make eye contact with their soldiers on the street. You didn't ask questions when businesses suddenly changed ownership overnight. You definitely didn't burst into their private dinners and put your hands on their property, even to save it. They would find her. Men like Enzo Bellini didn't leave loose ends. She'd seen his face, been in his inner sanctum, witnessed his vulnerability. How long did she have? A day? Hours? Isabella forced herself to her feet. She needed to move. Her usual sleeping spot behind the abandoned library was compromised. She'd mentioned the neighborhood to a street kid last week, and information had a way of traveling. She'd have to find somewhere new, somewhere they'd never think to look, somewhere that didn't exist in a city that Enzo Bellini owned. 3 blocks away, in the back of a black Mercedes idling outside Il Giardino Privato, Enzo Bellini stared at his phone with the intensity of a man trying to move objects with his mind. Piccolo was curled in his lap, breathing steadily now, occasionally making small, contented sounds that twisted something in Enzo's chest. "Anything?" he asked, without looking up. Marco, his head of security, shifted uncomfortably in the driver's seat. "Boss, we've got nothing. No cameras caught her face clearly. The hood blocked most angles. She didn't touch anything we could lift prints from. It's like she's done this before." "Done what?" "Vanished?" Enzo's fingers curled into a fist. "She's not a ghost, Marco. She's a woman. A woman who knew exactly how to save my dog when a licensed physician pronounced him dead. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from nowhere. We're checking veterinary schools, medical programs." "Faster." Enzo's voice dropped to the dangerous register that made seasoned soldiers nervous. "I want every resource we have on this, every contact, every favor owed. I want her found by morning." Marco hesitated. "Boss, with respect. Why? I mean, the dog's fine now. She did us a favor and left. Maybe we should just what?" Enzo looked up, and Marco immediately regretted speaking. Let her disappear? Pretend some guardian angel dropped out of the sky to perform a miracle and vanished without a word? His hand moved to stroke Piccolo's head, the gesture almost unconscious. "She saved him, Marco. When everyone else, including me, thought he was gone, she fought her way past armed guards to save him. Do you understand what that means?" Marco didn't, not really, but he nodded anyway. "It means I owe her a debt." Enzo's voice carried the weight of old-world conviction, the kind of code that predated law and outlasted governments. "A life debt. My family's life. That debt doesn't get ignored. It doesn't get written off because it's inconvenient. What if she doesn't want to be found? Then she's running from something. Enzo's eyes narrowed. And if she's running, she needs protection she clearly doesn't have. Look at her, Marco. Did you see her clothes? Her face? That woman is living on the streets. She has skills that should make her invaluable, and instead, she's hiding in alleys. That doesn't happen by choice. Marco pulled out his tablet, already pulling up surveillance footage from surrounding blocks. I'll put the word out to our contacts in the homeless community. Someone will have seen her. Carefully, Enzo warned. I don't want her spooked. No guns, no intimidation. If anyone on our payroll so much as raises their voice at her, I'll break their jaw personally. Understood? Understood. Marco paused. What do we tell the men about why we're looking for her? Enzo was quiet for a moment, his hand still moving rhythmically over Piccolo's fur. Tell them we're looking for family, he finally said, because that's what she became the moment she saved him. She just doesn't know it yet. By dawn, Isabella had found temporary refuge in the basement of an abandoned textile factory. She'd wedged herself between two rusted machines, her body positioned so she could see both exits. She hadn't slept. Every sound, every creak of settling metal, every skitter of rats in the walls sent adrenaline spiking through her system. When footsteps echoed in the space above her, deliberate and unhurried, she knew her time had run out. She pressed herself further into the shadows, barely breathing, her mind already calculating escape routes. The footsteps moved methodically, searching, not the frantic search of the desperate, but the patient, thorough search of professionals who had all the time in the world. We know you're here, a man's voice called out. Not threatening, almost gentle. We're not here to hurt you. Mr. Bellini wants to talk. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a hail of cartel bullets like Dr. Ramirez, but in a cold factory basement at the hands of the Mafia. She'd saved their boss's dog, and now they were going to make sure she never told anyone what she'd seen. The footsteps grew closer. Isabella's hand closed around the length of rusted pipe she'd positioned beside her hours earlier. If they were going to kill her, she wouldn't make it easy. Her body was weak from months of malnutrition, but desperation had a way of finding strength that didn't show up on a scale. The footsteps stopped directly above her hiding spot. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the machinery. Isabella held her breath, counting seconds. 5, 10, 15. Miss, please. The voice was closer now, right at the top of the stairs leading down to the basement level. Mr. Y. Bellini sent us to bring you to him. He wants to thank you for saving Piccolo. Thank her. Right, the same way the cartel had wanted to thank Dr. Ramirez for his discretion. Isabella's fingers tightened on the pipe. She knew how these things worked. You didn't thank witnesses, you eliminated them. The beam of light found her. There, don't move. Isabella moved. She exploded from her hiding spot, swinging the pipe in a wide arc that connected with the flashlight, sending it spinning across the concrete floor. In the sudden darkness, she heard the man curse, heard the rustle of other bodies converging, at least 3 of them. Maybe more. She ran for the east exit, the one she'd scouted earlier that led to a service tunnel. A hand grabbed her jacket, and she twisted, bringing the pipe down hard. The man grunted, and his grip loosened. She was smaller, weaker, but she'd spent 8 months learning to fight like a cornered animal, all teeth and unexpected angles. Jesus, Marco, she's got a weapon. Don't hurt her. Boss's orders. The hesitation in their voices gave Isabella another 3 seconds. She made it to the doorway before someone's arm locked around her waist from behind, lifting her off the ground. She drove her elbow back hard, aiming for ribs, for throat, for anything soft. The man holding her grunted, but didn't let go. "Stop fighting!" His voice was strained. "We're not going to hurt you." "Liar!" Isabella's voice broke. She was crying now, tears of rage and terror streaming down her face. "You're going to kill me because I saw too much, because I'm a loose end. Nobody's killing anybody." A new voice, commanding and achingly familiar, cut through the chaos. "Put her down, Sal. Gently." The arms around Isabella's waist loosened, and she stumbled forward, still clutching the pipe, spinning to face her attackers. 4 men in dark suits, looking distinctly worse for wear, one holding his ribs, another with a split lip, and standing in the doorway, backlit by the early morning sun, was Enzo Bellini. He looked different in daylight, still massive, still dangerous, but somehow more real, less like a nightmare and more like a man. He held Piccolo in the crook of one arm, the puppy's tail wagging happily, completely oblivious to the violence his presence had catalyzed. "You!" Isabella's voice was raw. "Stay back!" Enzo raised his free hand slowly, palm out, the same gesture she'd used in the restaurant when she'd approached his table. "I'm staying back. But I need you to listen to me for 2 minutes. Can you do that?" "Why should I?" "Because you saved his life." Enzo nodded down at Piccolo. "And in my world, that means something. It means I owe you a debt that can't be paid with money or threats or bullets. It means you're under my protection, whether you want it or not." Isabella laughed, a broken sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "Protection? From you?" "No." Enzo's voice softened. "From whoever you're running from." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She felt her grip on the pipe waver. "I don't know what you're talking about. You don't live in alleys because you want to." Enzo took one careful step forward. Piccolo made a small sound, and his tail wagged harder, like he recognized Isabella. "You don't hide your face because you're shy. You don't have skills that could make you invaluable and choose to starve instead. Someone hurt you. Someone's looking for you. And you've been running so long you've forgotten there's any other option. You don't know anything about me. I know you're a veterinarian, or you were training to be one." Another step. His men stayed back, watching their boss with expressions of mingled concern and confusion. "I know you're educated, skilled, and desperate enough to risk your life for a stranger's dog. I know you're alone. And I know that whatever you're running from, it's bad enough that even the Mafia looks like a better option than going back." Isabella's back hit the wall. She had nowhere left to retreat. "What do you want from me?" "A week." Enzo stopped walking, leaving 10 feet of space between them. "Live in my guest house. Monitor Piccolo, make sure he's fully recovered. In exchange, I'll pay you $10,000 and guarantee your safety. After 7 days, if you want to leave, you leave. No strings, no obligations. But you leave with resources you don't have now. And if I say no, then you walk out of here right now, and I'll never bother you again." Enzo's expression was unreadable. "But those men who are looking for you, they'll find you eventually. You know they will. You can't hide forever on empty pockets and luck." Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she'd managed fine for 8 months, that she didn't need his help or his money or his protection, but her body was shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash, and the pipe felt impossibly heavy in her hands. "1 week," she heard herself say. "And I sleep with the door locked. The entire guest house is yours, locks on every door, windows, whatever you need." Enzo's shoulders relaxed fractionally. You have my word. Nobody touches you. Nobody bothers you. You're there to take care of the dog, nothing else. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why do you care this much about a debt? Enzo looked down at Piccolo, and something in his expression cracked. Because he's the only thing in my life that loves me without fear, he said quietly. And you gave him back to me when everyone else said he was gone. That's not a debt I take lightly. He turned toward the door, then paused. There's a car outside. Clean clothes, food, whatever you need. My men will give you space, but they'll get you settled. Think of this as a job if it helps. 7 days of work for $10,000. Best paying gig you'll ever have. Isabella watched him walk away, Piccolo's head resting contentedly on his shoulder. The 4 men who'd cornered her were already retreating, one of them still rubbing his ribs where she'd hit him. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the pipe and sprint for the exit before this became a trap she couldn't escape. Instead, she followed them into the sunlight. The guest house was larger than any apartment Isabella had ever lived in, including the one she'd shared with 2 roommates during her veterinary program. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens that probably required a full-time staff. The furniture looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, all clean lines and expensive fabrics that Isabella was terrified to touch with her still dirty hands. She stood in the doorway for a full minute, unable to make herself step inside. This couldn't be real. Any moment now someone would laugh and tell her the actual accommodations were the gardening shed out back. But Enzo's driver, a quiet man named Vincent, who'd carefully avoided looking at the bruise forming on his jaw from where she'd hit him, simply set her bag down in the entryway and gestured inside. Bathrooms through there, kitchen stocked. Mr. Bellini will bring Piccolo by this evening for the first examination. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, miss, none of us have ever seen the boss like this. You really did something extraordinary. Then he was gone. And Isabella was alone, with more luxury than she'd experienced in 8 months of survival. She walked slowly through the space, touching things tentatively, half convinced they'd dissolve under her fingers. A king-sized bed, with sheets that probably cost more than her first car. A bathroom with a shower that had 6 different heads, and controls that looked like they belonged on a spaceship. A refrigerator full of actual food, not scraps, not garbage, but fresh fruit and vegetables and cheeses she couldn't even pronounce. She broke down crying in front of the open refrigerator, her body racking with sobs she'd held back for months. When the tears finally stopped, she peeled off her filthy clothes, stepped into the shower, and stood under water hot enough to hurt until her skin turned red and the dirt of 8 months swirled down the drain. Enzo arrived precisely at 7, Piccolo trotting beside him on a leather leash that probably cost more than Isabella's entire veterinary school wardrobe. She'd dressed in the clothes they'd provided, simple jeans and a sweater that actually fit, and pulled her damp hair into a ponytail. She felt almost human again, almost herself. "How's he been?" she asked, kneeling down to let Piccolo sniff her hand. The puppy's tail went into overdrive, his entire rear end wiggling with enthusiasm. "Good. Better than good, actually." Enzo watched her with that same intense focus from the restaurant. "He's been more energetic than I've seen him in weeks." Isabella ran her hands over Piccolo's body, checking for any residual trauma from the choking incident. His breathing sounded clear. Heart rate was good. She lifted his lip to check his gums, pink and healthy. But something nagged at her, a detail from the restaurant that she'd filed away in the chaos. "What do you feed him?" she asked. Enzo blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "The best. Filet mignon, usually. Sometimes salmon. Fresh food, nothing processed. Only the finest. You're poisoning him." The words came out harsher than Isabella intended. In her peripheral vision, she saw Marco, who'd followed Enzo in and positioned himself near the door, stiffen. You didn't tell Enzo Bellini he was doing something wrong. Not if you valued your continued existence. But Isabella was looking at Piccolo, at the slight redness around his eyes, the faint irritation on his skin that she'd initially attributed to the choking trauma. Look at his coat. See how it's a little dull right here? And the skin underneath? That's inflammation. He's having an allergic reaction. To what? Enzo's voice was carefully controlled. To the rich food you're giving him. Isabella sat back on her heels, meeting his eyes. French bulldogs are prone to food sensitivities. Their digestive systems can't handle the fat content in filet mignon and salmon. It causes chronic inflammation, which weakens their immune system, which makes them susceptible to exactly the kind of crisis we had at the restaurant. Enzo stared at her. Marco looked like he was watching a car accident in slow motion. "You're telling me," Enzo said slowly, "that I nearly killed my dog by feeding him too well. I'm telling you that what's good for humans isn't always good for dogs. He needs a specialized diet. High quality, yes, but formulated for his breed's specific needs. Limited ingredient, probably a novel protein source like duck or venison. No table scraps, no matter how expensive." The silence stretched. Isabella realized she was still on her knees on the floor, scolding a Mafia boss in his own guest house about his dog food choices. This was it. This was where he'd realize what a mistake he'd made bringing her here, where the fairy tale ended and reality reasserted itself. Then Enzo laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that transformed his entire face. "Marco, are you hearing this? She just called me an idiot." "I didn't," Isabella started. "You did. And you're right." Enzo knelt down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cedar-scented. He scratched Piccolo behind the ears, his expression softening in a way that made him look almost vulnerable. "I've been making him sick, trying to show him I care. What kind of diet does he need?" Isabella blinked, thrown by the complete lack of ego in the question. "I can write up a plan. There are prescription foods that would work, or I can design a home-cooked diet, if you prefer. It'll take a few weeks to transition him fully, but you should see improvement in whatever you think is best." Enzo stood, offering her his hand to help her up. She took it hesitantly, surprised by the warmth of his palm, the careful way he pulled her to her feet without using too much force. "You're the expert." "I'm just the idiot who's been feeding him steak." Marco coughed something that might have been a suppressed laugh. Enzo shot him a look that promised retribution later, but there was no real heat in it. "I'll need to examine him daily for the first few days," Isabella said, trying to regain her professional composure. "Monitor his response to the diet change. Check for any complications from the choking incident. And he should see a veterinary specialist for a full workup. I can recommend someone if you're the specialist." Enzo's tone left no room for argument. "You saved him when a licensed doctor said he was dead. You diagnosed a problem I've been throwing money at for months in under 5 minutes. As far as I'm concerned, you're the only person I trust with him." Isabella felt something shift in her chest. Trust. When was the last time anyone had trusted her? When was the last time she'd trusted herself? "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll take care of him." Enzo nodded, then headed for the door. Marco followed, but Enzo paused at the threshold. "Isabella?" It was the first time he'd used her name. "Thank you for being honest with me. Most people in my life are too afraid to tell me when I'm wrong." "That sounds lonely," Isabella said, before she could stop herself. Something flickered in Enzo's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "It is," he admitted. Then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with Piccolo, who had curled up on her feet and was already falling asleep. She looked down at the puppy, at this tiny creature that had somehow become the bridge between her old life and whatever this new one was becoming. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the Bellini estate, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. For the first time in 8 months, Isabella felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. 3 days into her stay at the Bellini estate, Isabella was examining Piccolo in the main house when Marco dropped a book. It was nothing, just a leather-bound ledger that slipped from the side table and hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. But Isabella was on her feet and halfway to the door before her conscious mind registered what had happened, her body coiled tight, ready to run. She froze when she realized what she'd done. Marco was staring at her, his hand still extended from where he'd reached to catch the falling book. Enzo, seated in his chair with Piccolo on his lap, had gone very still. "Sorry," Isabella said, forcing herself to walk back to where she'd been kneeling. Her hands were shaking. "Sorry, When did it start?" Enzo's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Not anger, something sharper. Recognition. "When did what start?" "The running." He watched her with those dark, calculating eyes. "I've seen it before. Men who came back from war with their nerves shot. Can't handle sudden movements, loud noises. They're always looking for exits, always ready to bolt." He paused. "You do that. Every room you enter, you clock the exits first. You never sit with your back to a door. And just now, that wasn't surprise. That was training." Isabella's throat felt tight. "I don't know what you mean." "You flinch when people move too fast. You barely eat, even with a full kitchen. You don't sleep. I've seen the lights on in the guest house at 3 in the morning." Enzo set Piccolo gently on the floor, his full attention now on Isabella. "Someone hurt you? Or someone's trying to? I should go." Isabella stood, looking for her bag. "Piccolo's doing well on the new diet. The inflammation is already decreasing. You don't really need me to—" "Sit down." It wasn't a request. Isabella found herself sinking back into her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. He'd dig, he'd find out, and then she'd be exposed. The cartel would know where she was. Everything she'd sacrificed, everyone she'd lost, would be for nothing. Enzo stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of amber liquid and 2 glasses. He poured generous measures into both, then handed one to Isabella. "Drink. You look like you're about to pass out." She took the glass with trembling hands. The whiskey burned going down, but it did steady her nerves fractionally. "I had Marco do some research," Enzo said, settling back into his chair. His tone was conversational, but Isabella could hear the weight behind each word. "Wasn't hard, actually. We know you have veterinary training. That much was obvious. So Marco started checking veterinary programs in the region, looking for students who disappeared in the last year or 2. Cross-referenced with missing persons reports, unsolved cases, anything that might explain why someone with your skills would be living in an alley." Isabella's fingers tightened on the glass. "You had no right." "Isabella Moria Romano," Enzo continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Top of your class at Metro State Veterinary School. Published 2 papers before you even graduated. Your professors called you a prodigy. You were being recruited by the best animal hospitals in 3 states. He leaned forward. "And then 8 months ago, you vanished. No forwarding address. No contact with family or friends. Just gone, like you never existed. Stop." The word came out as barely a whisper. "The same week you disappeared," Enzo said, his voice gentler now. "A veterinary professor named Dr. Miguel Ramirez was murdered. 3 shots to the chest, execution style, in the parking lot of his clinic. The police called it a robbery, but we both know it wasn't." Isabella's hands were shaking so badly now that whiskey sloshed over the rim of her glass. Enzo reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and took the glass from her before she could drop it. "Dr. Ramirez treated a dog that belonged to a federal informant," Enzo continued. "A man who was going to testify against the Los Santos cartel. The feds thought they were being clever, using a civilian vet instead of going through official channels. But the cartel found out, and they made an example. I was there." The words tore out of Isabella before she could stop them. "I was doing a rotation at his clinic. I saw them come in. I hid in the supply closet, and I watched through the door crack while they—" Her voice broke. "He begged them. He told them he didn't know anything, that he'd just treated a sick animal. They shot him anyway." The room was silent, except for Isabella's ragged breathing. Marco had disappeared at some point, giving them privacy. Piccolo had wandered over and was pressing his small, warm body against Isabella's leg. "They saw you," Enzo said. It wasn't a question. "One of them, when they were leaving, he looked back, and our eyes met through the crack in the door. Just for a second, but it was enough." Isabella's hands moved to her face, covering her eyes. "I ran. I grabbed my backpack and I ran, and I didn't stop. I emptied my bank account, $300, and I've been moving ever since. Different neighborhoods, different alleys, never staying anywhere more than a few nights, never using my real name, never, ever using my skills, because I knew that if they found out I was still alive, they'd come for me too. Los Santos," Enzo's voice had gone cold. "They're vicious. They don't leave witnesses." "I know." Isabella lowered her hands, meeting his eyes. "That's why I can't stay here. If they find out where I am, if they connect me to you, I won't be responsible for bringing that war to your doorstep." Enzo was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something Isabella didn't expect. He smiled. Not a pleasant smile, a predator's smile, all teeth and promise. "Isabella, I don't think you understand how this works." He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "The Los Santos cartel operates on my sufferance in this city. They pay tribute to move their product through my territory. They ask permission before they conduct business. They are, in the grand scheme of things, small fish in a very large pond. They killed Dr. Ramirez in broad daylight, because he wasn't under anyone's protection." Enzo's eyes locked onto hers. "But you are. You saved Piccolo, which means you're La Familia. And La Familia doesn't bow to cartels or feds or anyone else who thinks they can operate in my city without consequences." Isabella shook her head. "You don't understand what you're saying. These people are about to learn a very important lesson about the cost of threatening what's mine." Enzo stood, walking to his desk. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marco, I need information on every Los Santos operation in the city, every location, every soldier, every dollar they make on my streets. And I need it by morning." He hung up and turned back to Isabella, who was staring at him in disbelief. "You can't," she said. "You can't go to war with the cartel because of me. That's insane." "I'm not going to war." Enzo's smile widened. "I'm going to send a message. There's a difference." The call came at 2 in the morning. Isabella was awake, as usual, curled up in the oversized armchair by the window, with a veterinary journal she'd found in the guest house library. Piccolo was sleeping on her lap, his small body warm and trusting. She'd been reading the same paragraph for 20 minutes, her mind too restless to focus, when her burner phone, one of 3 Enzo had insisted she carry, buzzed with a text. It was from Marco. Boss is in Philadelphia until tomorrow night. Meeting ran late. Estate security is doubled. You're safe. Isabella stared at the message, trying to identify why it made her stomach clench with unease. Enzo had told her about the trip yesterday, had apologized for leaving her alone, had assured her that his men would die before they let anyone touch her. She believed him. She did. But 8 months of survival had taught her that safety was an illusion, and the moment you believed in it was the moment you died. She set the phone down and went back to her journal, but the unease wouldn't leave. Piccolo stirred in her lap, lifting his head with a soft whine. His ears were pricked forward, alert in a way that made Isabella's pulse quicken. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, stroking his head. "What do you hear?" The estate was too quiet. That was the problem. Isabella had grown accustomed to the ambient sounds of Enzo's world, guards changing shifts, the distant murmur of voices, the occasional car engine. But now there was nothing. Just a silence so complete it felt like pressure against her eardrums. She stood carefully, setting Piccolo on the chair. Her hand moved automatically to check the exits, front door, back door, the window in the bedroom that she'd tested on her first night to make sure it opened. Her phone was in her pocket. The small knife Marco had given her. Just in case, he'd said, though they both knew what a knife would do against cartel soldiers, was tucked in her waistband. Isabella moved to the front window and peered through the curtains. The floodlights that normally illuminated the grounds were dark, all of them. Her breath caught. That wasn't a power outage. The lights in the main house were still on, visible through the trees. Just the perimeter security was down. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marco. "Stay inside. Lock everything. Don't open the door for anyone." Isabella's hands were already moving, checking locks, pulling curtains closed. Piccolo was at her heels now, sensing her fear, his tail down. She scooped him up and moved to the bedroom, the most defensible room in the guest house. Only one entrance, reinforced door, window with a clear view of the tree line. She was halfway across the living room when the power died. Complete darkness swallowed the guest house. Isabella froze, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This wasn't a precaution. This was an attack. Through the window she saw them, shadows moving between the trees, at least 6 of them, spreading out in a coordinated pattern that spoke of military training. They weren't Enzo's men. His soldiers moved differently, with the casual confidence of people on their own territory. These men moved like hunters, low and fast and utterly silent. Los Santos had found her. Isabella's mind raced through options, discarding them as fast as they appeared. She couldn't run. They'd have the perimeter covered. She couldn't fight. 6 armed men against 1 woman with a pocket knife and a puppy. She couldn't call for help, because whoever had cut the power had probably jammed cell signals too. And even if she could get through, Enzo was 200 miles away, and his men were... Where were his men? Marco had said security was doubled, but Isabella hadn't seen a single guard since the lights went out. Either they'd been neutralized or one of them had let the cartel in. The thought hit her like ice water. A mole. Someone in Enzo's organization who'd sold her location to Los Santos for God knew what price. Someone who'd waited until Enzo was away, until the estate was vulnerable. Someone who was about to watch her die. Isabella grabbed her phone with shaking hands. No signal, just as she'd feared. But the burner had one feature Marco had insisted on, an emergency beacon that transmitted directly to Enzo's security network, even without cell service. She activated it, praying someone was monitoring, knowing that even if they responded immediately, it would be too late. The sound of breaking glass came from the main house. Not the guest house. They were hitting Enzo's residence first, probably looking for her there. She had minutes, maybe seconds. Piccolo whimpered in her arms. Isabella pressed her face against his soft fur, breathing in his puppy smell, and made a decision. She couldn't save herself, but she could save him. She moved quickly to the bedroom, opened the window as quietly as she could manage. The trees were close here, providing cover. She kissed Piccolo's head once, then pushed him through the window onto the soft grass below. He looked up at her, confused, starting to bark. "Run," she whispered. "Go find Marco. Go!" Piccolo hesitated. Then his instincts kicked in, and he bolted for the trees, his small form disappearing into the shadows. Isabella watched until she couldn't see him anymore, relief and terror warring in her chest. At least one of them would survive this. The front door of the guest house exploded inward. Not picked or forced, blown with enough explosive to rip the lock clean off. Isabella spun, the knife suddenly in her hand, though she didn't remember drawing it. A man stepped through the smoke, backlit by moonlight, a rifle in his hands. Isabella Romano. His accent was thick, South American. "You've led us on quite a chase, Pequeña, but the running stops tonight." Two more men entered behind him, spreading out to cut off any escape. Isabella backed toward the bedroom, her mind calculating distances, angles, impossibilities. The window was still open behind her. She could jump, try to run, probably make it 10 feet before they shot her in the back. Or she could fight and buy time. Time for Marco to respond to the beacon. Time for Enzo to somehow materialize out of thin air and save her. Time for a miracle she knew wasn't coming. "Dr. Ramirez sent his regards," the man said, raising his rifle. "Oh, wait. No, he didn't. Because we put 3 bullets in him, just like we're about to—" The shot came from outside, not from the cartel soldiers, from the darkness beyond the blown door. The lead man jerked and fell, a red bloom spreading across his chest. His companions dove for cover as more shots rang out, precise and professional. Through the doorway, backlit by muzzle flash, Isabella saw Marco. Not alone, at least a dozen of Enzo's soldiers, moving with lethal efficiency. The firefight was brief and brutal. When it ended, 3 cartel soldiers lay dead, and the others had scattered into the night. Marco appeared in the bedroom doorway, his face grim. "Are you hurt?" Isabella shook her head, unable to speak. The knife fell from her numb fingers. "The mole was Sal," Marco said quietly. "He cut the power, jammed the signals, told Los Santos when the boss would be away. He's been feeding them information for weeks." His jaw tightened. "He won't be doing that anymore." "Enzo," Isabella managed, "is on his way. Should be here in 2 hours." Marco holstered his weapon. "But Isabella, you need to understand something. This isn't over. If Los Santos is willing to attack the Bellini estate, to plant a mole in our organization, they want you dead, bad enough to risk everything." Isabella slumped against the wall, her legs finally giving out. "I know." "The boss is going to finish this," Marco said. "One way or another. This ends now." Enzo's phone rang while he was still an hour outside the city. Marco's voice came through the speaker, tight with controlled urgency. "Boss, we've got a situation. Los Santos hit the estate. Isabella's secure for now. But they're regrouping. I'm counting at least 20 hostiles in the woods surrounding the property. They're not leaving without her." The speedometer on Enzo's Maserati climbed past 90. How many men do we have? 12 that I trust completely. Maybe 8 more if I call in the outer crews, but that's 15 minutes minimum. A pause. Boss, they have RPGs. They're not playing anymore. This is a full military assault. Enzo's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Where is she? I moved her to the library in the main house. Reinforced walls, steel door, only one entrance. She's got Piccolo with her. I posted 4 men outside. But if they breach the perimeter, they won't. Enzo's voice dropped to the register that made seasoned killers nervous. Hold them off for 45 minutes. I'm coming! He disconnected and pushed the accelerator to the floor. The engine screamed as the speedometer hit 120. Trees blurred past in the darkness. Enzo's mind was already calculating trajectories, weaknesses, the fastest way to end this. Los Santos wanted a war. They were about to learn what that actually meant. Isabella pressed her back against the library's mahogany shelves. Piccolo clutched to her chest. The puppy was shaking, picking up on her terror, occasionally whimpering when the sound of gunfire echoed from outside. The library was exactly as Marco described, a fortress disguised as a reading room. But Isabella knew that any fortress could be breached given enough time and firepower. The steel door was locked from the inside. Marco had shoved a phone into her hand before sealing her in. You don't open this door for anyone except me or the boss. I don't care what you hear. You stay put. That had been 20 minutes ago. Since then, the sounds of combat had grown steadily closer. Automatic weapons fire, explosions that rattled the windows, shouted orders in Spanish and English, men screaming. Isabella tried not to think about what the screaming meant, tried not to imagine Marco or Vincent or any of Enzo's other soldiers lying dead in the gardens. An explosion, bigger than the others, shook the entire house. Books tumbled from shelves. A crack appeared in the window. Piccolo yelped, and Isabella held him tighter, her lips moving in prayers she'd abandoned years ago. Please, she whispered to the empty room. Please let him get here in time. The gunfire outside reached a crescendo, then suddenly died away. The silence was worse than the noise. Isabella stared at the door, her heart hammering. This was it. They'd broken through. Marco's men were dead or scattered. The cartel was coming for her, and there was nowhere left to run. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. A voice in Spanish. La biblioteca. She's in the library. Someone tried the door handle. When it didn't open, they stepped back. Isabella knew what came next. She grabbed Piccolo and dove behind Enzo's massive desk, just as the explosion blew the steel door off its hinges. The blast was deafening. Smoke and debris filled the room. Through the ringing in her ears, Isabella heard boots on marble. Men entering the library. She pressed herself smaller behind the desk, one hand over Piccolo's muzzle to keep him quiet, the other clutching the useless pocket knife. Isabella Romano. The voice was cultured, almost gentle, different from the soldiers. This was someone in charge. There's no point hiding. My men have thermal imaging. We can see exactly where you are. A red dot appeared on the desk above Isabella's head. She closed her eyes. This was how it ended. Not in an alley like she'd always imagined, but in a library, surrounded by books, holding a puppy. There were worse deaths. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. The roar of an engine coming from outside, getting rapidly closer. Her eyes snapped open. What the? One of the cartel soldiers started. The wall exploded, not from explosives, from impact. Enzo's Maserati came through the exterior wall of the library like a missile, scattering brick and plaster and men. The car was a mangled wreck, steam pouring from the crumpled hood, but the driver's door flew open and Enzo emerged with a gun in each hand. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause to assess, just started shooting with the precision of a man who'd been killing since before Isabella was born. The cartel soldiers scattered, returning fire, but they'd been caught completely off guard. Enzo moved like violence personified, using the wrecked car as cover, his movements economical and brutally efficient. Marco and the remaining Bellini soldiers poured through the hole in the wall behind him, turning the library into a kill box. The firefight lasted maybe 30 seconds. When it ended, 6 cartel soldiers lay dead and the rest had retreated. Enzo vaulted over his destroyed desk and dropped to his knees beside Isabella. His hands moved over her frantically, checking for injuries, his face twisted with something that looked like agony. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Isabella, talk to me. I'm okay." Her voice came out surprisingly steady. "We're both okay." Enzo's shoulders sagged with relief. Then he pulled her against his chest, one arm around her, the other reaching down to stroke Piccolo's head. Isabella could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, could feel the tremor in his hands that he was trying to hide. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I should have been here. I should have protected you better. This is my fault." "You drove through a wall." Isabella pulled back to look at him. His face was cut from flying glass, his knuckles bloody. He looked half feral with rage and fear. "You literally drove through a wall to get to me." "I would have driven through 10 walls." His hands cupped her face. "Don't you understand? You're not just some debt to be repaid. You're—" An explosion outside cut him off. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Boss, they've got reinforcements. At least 30 more coming up the access road. We're outnumbered 3-1. Enzo stood, pulling Isabella up with him, keeping her behind him. "Then we even the odds. Marco, get our heavy weapons. Call in every crew we have within 50 miles. I want 100 soldiers here in the next 20 minutes. Boss, that's a war." "Yes." Enzo's smile was terrifying. They wanted one. Now they've got one. But this doesn't end with retreat or negotiation. Los Santos cartel made a fatal mistake when they attacked my home and threatened my family. Tonight, we finish this. Permanently. He turned to Isabella, his expression softening fractionally. "Stay in here, behind the desk. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Enzo, I will burn this city to ash before I let them touch you again." He kissed her forehead, quick and fierce. Then he was gone. Isabella sank back behind the desk. Piccolo pressed against her chest and listened to the sound of war erupting outside. Through the gaping hole in the wall, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the night sky. The Bellini estate had become a battlefield, and at its center stood a man who'd just declared total war on an entire cartel, all because she'd saved his puppy. The sun rose over the Bellini estate 6 hours later, illuminating a landscape transformed by violence. Smoke still drifted from burning vehicles, scattered across the grounds. Emergency crews moved between the wreckage, their movements efficient and silent. The local police had arrived, taken one look at the carnage, and quietly left when Marco explained that this was family business. Everyone in the city understood what that meant. Isabella sat on the stone steps of the main house, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the cleanup with numb detachment. Piccolo was asleep in her lap, exhausted from the night's terror. She'd counted 17 bodies being carried away in black bags. She tried not to think about how many of them had come looking for her specifically. How many families would wake up this morning, missing someone, because she'd been foolish enough to save a puppy in a restaurant. Enzo emerged from the house, his shirt torn and blood-stained, a bandage wrapped around his left arm. He'd been coordinating with his soldiers, making calls to contacts throughout the city, ensuring that every remaining Los Santos operative knew exactly what happened to organizations that threatened the Bellini family. Isabella had heard parts of those conversations. They'd been delivered in the same calm, measured tone he used when discussing Piccolo's diet. But the words themselves had been terrifying. He lowered himself onto the step beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just watched the sun climb higher, turning the smoke golden. "It's over," Enzo finally said. "Los Santos's leadership is dead. The survivors are scattered. The ones who aren't in body bags are in hiding, and they'll stay there if they're smart." He paused. "Marco intercepted communications. They're pulling out of the city entirely. They know they can't win this." Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. "How many of your men died?" 3. The number sat heavy between them. "Vincent. Sal, the traitor, but he was still one of mine. And Tommy, who was 23 and just got engaged last month." Enzo's jaw tightened. "Their families will be taken care of. Their deaths won't be forgotten. They died because of me. They died protecting family." Enzo turned to look at her. "That's what they signed up for. That's the choice they made. You don't get to carry that guilt." "Don't I?" Isabella's laugh was bitter. "I should have kept running. I should have never stopped in that alley, never looked through that window, never saved Piccolo." Enzo gestured to the puppy sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Never showed me that there are still people in this world who act out of compassion instead of calculation. Never reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond power and territory." Isabella didn't answer. She couldn't. The tears she'd been holding back all night finally spilled over, silent and unstoppable. Enzo pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling her head, the other careful not to disturb the sleeping puppy. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "What happened tonight wasn't your fault. It was the fault of men who thought they could take what they wanted without consequences. Men who forgot that some things in this world are sacred. You reminded me what those things are." "I'm not sacred," Isabella said against his shirt. "I'm just a person who made a mistake 8 months ago and has been paying for it ever since. You witnessed a murder and refused to stay silent. You saved a life when everyone else said it was hopeless. You fought back when cornered instead of giving up." Enzo pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Those aren't mistakes, Isabella. That's integrity. That's courage. That's exactly the kind of person who belongs in La Familia." The words hung in the air between them. La Familia. Family. Not in the biological sense, but in the way that mattered in Enzo's world. The bonds that were chosen, that were forged in blood and loyalty and trust. "I don't understand," Isabella said. Enzo stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Piccolo stirred but didn't wake. Around them, Enzo's soldiers had gathered. Marco, the remaining guards, the reinforcements who'd arrived during the battle. At least 40 men, all watching their boss with expressions of curiosity and respect. "Isabella Romano," Enzo said, his voice carrying across the grounds, "saved my life by saving the life of the one thing I love most in this world. She did this at great personal risk, asking for nothing in return. She has been hunted, threatened, and attacked, and through it all she has shown strength and grace that humbles me." He paused, his eyes scanning his assembled soldiers. "From this moment forward, she is La Familia. My family. Under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me directly. Anyone who harms her will answer to me personally. This is not a request or a suggestion. This is law." The soldiers nodded, some placing fists over their hearts in acknowledgement. Marco stepped forward, offering Isabella a slight bow that felt almost ceremonial. "Welcome to the family, Dr. Romano." Isabella looked at the faces surrounding her, hard men who'd just fought a small war in her defense, who were now treating her with a deference that felt surreal. Then she looked at Enzo, at the fierce protectiveness in his expression, the promise written in every line of his body. "I don't want to be helpless anymore," she said quietly. "I don't want to hide or run or be afraid every time someone moves too fast. If I'm staying, if I'm really part of this family, then I need to contribute something more than just taking care of Piccolo." A smile tugged at Enzo's lips. "What did you have in mind? You have soldiers who get hurt, who need medical attention they can't get at hospitals without answering questions." Isabella straightened her shoulders, feeling something shift inside her. The scared, running woman falling away to reveal someone stronger underneath. "I'm a trained veterinary surgeon, but anatomy is anatomy. I can set bones, suture wounds, manage trauma. Let me be useful. Let me help protect the family that's protecting me." Enzo's smile widened into something that looked almost like pride. "Dr. Romano, the Bellini family would be honored to have you as our chief medical officer." He glanced at Marco. "Set up a proper clinic in the East Wing, full surgical equipment, whatever she needs. And I still take care of Piccolo," Isabella added, looking down at the puppy who'd started this entire chain of events. "He's my patient, my responsibility." "He's our responsibility now," Enzo corrected gently. "Everything in this family is shared. The burdens, the joys, the small French bulldogs with food allergies." Isabella laughed, surprised that she still could after the night they'd had. Piccolo woke at the sound, his tail immediately wagging, his tongue reaching up to lick her chin. She scratched behind his ears and felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 months finally settle in her chest. Safety. Belonging. Home. The morning sun continued its climb, burning away the last of the smoke, revealing the Bellini estate in all its scarred but standing glory. There would be repairs to make, wounds to heal, funerals to attend. But for the first time since she'd watched Dr. Ramirez die, Isabella Romano wasn't thinking about what came next with fear. She was thinking about it with hope. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, not from running away from our fears, but from the courage to act with compassion even when it puts us at risk. Isabella learned that the things we love most are worth fighting for, that family isn't always about blood, but about the people who choose to stand beside us when the world turns dark. And sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness, saving a puppy, showing mercy, refusing to let fear make us cruel, can change not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below about what the word family means to you. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, redemption, and unexpected connections to life. What story should we tell next?